Hi everybody, Dave Domenech, Training Manager here at Amplify Surgical. I'm going to go over the back table setup for a dualX system. The dualX is comprised of basically 4 sections. You have trialing, implant delivery, lockout screw delivery, and graft delivery. We're going to go through each section individually. The dualX system has some accessory instruments available as well, namely the T-handle, the slap hammer or back slap, the thread clearing tool, and the cage guide. If your surgeon finds it necessary to use the T-handle, I warn you to use it very cautiously. The X handle has so much power and is very efficient at delivering power that we really only need to use a couple of fingers on the T-handle. I don't want it being used with too much muscle like this. Just use it with 3 or 4 fingers like this. The first step of the dualX procedure is trialing. After the disc prep portion is complete, the trials come into play. The trials are calibrated to each given implant height, meaning this one says 8 to 10 on the paddle. That means that it mimics a 8 to 10 implant collapsed 8 millimeters high going in and then rotates to 10 millimeters high once in the disc space. That would correspond to the 8 to 10 implant. This one would be for 9 to 12. We want to make sure that we not only trial midline, but we also trial laterally as well. And that just makes sure that we have enough space for such a large implant. The paddle length is 28 millimeters. The implant length anterior to posterior is 25. If we can get the paddle within the disc space, that assures us that we will have space for the implant to reside in the disc space as well. The leverage bar can be used for a snug fit and makes the trial more of a T-handle. And I have the surgeon turn clockwise 90 degrees and then counterclockwise, just due to the rounded edges of each trial. The way the implant works is that we cannot stop at any given point. We have to get to the terminal height of any given implant. So if an implant says 8 to 10, I need to know that I have 10 millimeters of height. The drawbar will draw the nose back, and these sleds will slide up and down these ramps and then eventually fall into these little recesses or detents. That will provide passive lock in order to get a lockout screw across for the permanent lock. So we have to get to that height. The dualX implant delivery section of instruments is as follows. First of all, you will receive either sterile implants or a caddy with non-sterile implants that needs to get processed through SPD. The sterile implants have 2 generations actually. If you see a number 2 on it, it has the 2nd generation lockout screw in it. If you see the no number 2 on the box, please use the lockout screws from the caddy in the tray. That's all of them are generation 2 screws in the caddy. You have the dualX handle, the outer tube, the inner tube, the drawbar, the counter torque, and the cage guide. The inner tube gets put into the outer tube and mounted onto the X handle with a click. When it's time for the counter torque goes over the thumb wheel. And the cage guide can be used in multi-directions, either handle medially or handle laterally, depending on if they're using it to protect the dura or the nerve root. The lockout screw delivery instruments are as follows. In the tray, you will see a generation 1 screwdriver and retainer shaft. The inside screwdriver gets screwed into the outer shaft and can be used with the Gen 1 screws. However, we strongly encourage you to use the Gen 2 screws when possible. The Gen 1 screwdriver can only be loaded onto the black torque limiting handle, cannot be used on the fixed handle. Then you have the Gen 2 screwdriver, the torque limiting screwdriver handle, the fixed screwdriver handle, the path clearing tool, and the caddy with the non-sterile Gen 2 screws that comes in the tray. The Gen 2 screwdriver loads into the torque limiting handle with an AO connection. The flat portion of the screwdriver does not go all the way into the handle, but as long as it doesn't come out, it's loaded properly. It can also be loaded into the fixed handle as well, but use the torque limiting handle primarily. The Generation 2 screw is loaded onto the screwdriver with a slight click. The final section of the dualX procedure is delivering graft into the implant. Graft delivery instruments are as follows: the funnel, the nozzle tip, the inner tube, and then the bone tamp. The nozzle tip gets threaded onto the inner tube, and make sure it's very tight. For graft loading, about 5 cc's of some kind of putty or flowable graft can be loaded into each tube. The funnel is put onto the hex portion of the tube, but make sure to inform the scrub tech that it goes on loose and it comes off very easily. Make sure you tell the scrub tech to push down the graft into the funnel as far down into the tube as possible, and then use the bone tamp in order to load the bone graft all the way down to the nozzle tip.